So listen, I'll move on and talk briefly about Paddy talks about his time in the bog. And the bog was a huge thing because people didn't buy turf in the local area. Sorry, they didn't buy coal. They had to save turf. They wouldn't have had chainsaws to cut sticks. So therefore turf, the bog was a massive thing in every area. So this story is entitled Day in the Bog. If I get a chance to find a man cutting turf in the bog with a turf spade or a breast spade, I would like to get a photo of the operation because it's all machines now and the bog is too wet for machines. When I lived in the townland of Drumlocht, our turf bog was in Drumshammuck Bog, and I was allowed to go to the bog with a neighbour called Bridget Murray, and she let me drive the donkey. Bridget was going for a load of turf and I was sightseeing. I was about 6 years old and I was thrilled with the bog. Big open space and everyone shouting at each other in fun. I was barefooted going to the bog and the burnt heather roots cut the feet off me. The place looked like a wilderness or some sort of a desert. I thought to come back to explore would be a great idea, but if you hadn't a guide you would get lost. Tubs of butter and barrels of poteen were the only things preserved in those years. The bog was only a bridge then. The poteen was distilled in Drumshammuck Bog and a safe place to hide it. No one would travel out through the bog if it was a desert. I led the donkey home for Bridget Murray, and when I got near her house along the main road, when thorns were sticking in my bare feet, and I stood to let the donkey go on, and the wheel of the cart tossed me, run me over and knocked out my collarbone. Bridget got me tea, a well-buttered pancake, and left me home. All went well till I started to suck my porridge with the spoon in my left hand. I wasn't allowed to suck my porridge with the left hand, so I was questioned why I was doing it, and I had to tell what happened. My father, Lord rest him, drove me in our pony and trap to Dr. O'Rourke in Ballyconnell next morning, and that man wasn't there, so we had to drive on over to Belturbet to a Dr. Stewart, who pushed my collarbone back into place and put my arm in a sling. The doctor's wife brought me into her room, made me nice coffee, and said you will come back to see us when you get better. I guess I was the first from Derrylin to ever travel that road going to Belturbet. Now the Derrylin people, since that lane bridge was blown up, all have to travel that way to get to Belturbet. It's 70 years since I had to travel that journey. Times haven't improved and the roads haven't improved either. Next time I went to Drumshammuck Bog, I was sent with the men's tea after I came from Dromani Moor School. Men always got duck eggs for their tea, working in the bog, and they reheated the tea because everyone had a fire. The tea was warmed in a 6-penny tin can, and a bit of heather put into the can of tea. It was said you didn't have a smoky taste of tea when it was heated. A woman that never gave eggs to her men used to gather empty egg shells and scattered them where her men took their tea, to have people talk about her giving eggs to her men. Men in the bog often hadn't matches to light a fire, and some would be sent to the nearest house for a coal to light their bog fire. Often an old stack of turf thatched in the bog, and a few would be taken to light the fire for turf cutters. A man used to tell that he could send his wise dog to a neighbour's house for a coal, write a note, put in the dog's mouth, he would point and the dog would go for the message. One day the wind was blowing the smoke into the dog's eyes, so the dog came down the hill backways to keep the smoke out of his eyes. When you were 8 or 9 years, you were allowed to catch turf from the cutter's place on the barrow, 2 row and a binder enough to wheel out of a wet bog. 2 barrows used to what was called the long wheel. The cutter had to wheel a barrow first or second day in the bog. A spread floor along the bog hole was put out without a barrow, and some used a long shovel with 2 turf on it, and a man in Lissaskey said he worked with a greedy farmer who built the spread turf up the shaft of the shovel. He was so greedy this man put 22 turf up the shovel, and the man had to swing them out like what you would call the jib of a crane nowadays. The barrows of turf were dropped in rows and a space left between the rows to spread the turf on for winning. Next would be to lift them in windrows or clamp them, and on dry ground men would put up footings. The next job, if in windrow, the windrow was putting them in rows. When it's going to rain, he gets his backside to the rain. First job in the bog was to drain out water out of the bog hole, then strip the top sods off the turf bank into the bog hole. That's dry for wheeling out the turf. The turf hollow was called the cutaway, or the second cutting the turf wheeled out the farthest was called the far wheeling. So he goes into talking in more details, and he talks about the McMahon. All tools in our bog in Derrylin were made by the McMahons, Roslay. So the McMahon spade is quite a familiar and a popular name of spade, and it was started in Roslay.
I have one of the sons coming later today.
Brilliant. So that's referencing that.
Yeah.
The McMahon spade is a very, very popular spade in this land.